The Red Figure at Grandmother's Door by Sarah Mitchell. In 2005, a young woman found herself living in a remote farmhouse caring for her ill elderly grandmother. One fateful night she was suddenly jolted awake from a peaceful nap by the sound of loud, crazed screaming echoing through the old house. Her heart racing, she rushed to her grandmother's room fearing the worst. What she saw chilled her to the bone. The frail old woman was cowering under the sheets like a frightened child, trembling uncontrollably. The young caretaker, whose name remains undisclosed, shook her grandmother vigorously, trying desperately to get her attention and snap her out of this terrified state. After what felt like an eternity, the grandmother finally seemed to regain some composure, though her eyes remained wide with fear. In a shaky voice barely above a whisper, the grandmother claimed she had seen a red figure standing ominously by the door. She could only describe the entity as Satan himself, come to claim her soul. The young woman tried to rationalize what she was hearing, but her grandmother insisted she had never experienced hallucinations before in her long life. She knew with absolute certainty that what she saw was real. As the night wore on, the grandmother refused to be left alone, clutching her granddaughter's hand in a vice-like grip. The words of an old Quranic verse echoed in the young woman's mind. Say, I seek refuge with the Lord of the dawn from the mischief of created things. But even these words of comfort did little to ease the palpable dread that now permeated the isolated farmhouse. What evil had come to visit them in the night? And would it return? The Football-Faced Demons by Margaret Thompson. A 67-year-old retired teacher arrived at the hospital in a state of panic, claiming she was being tormented by visions of odd-looking faces hovering over her. The woman insisted she wasn't going crazy, and laboratory tests quickly ruled out two common culprits of hallucination: infection and drug interactions. Her family was so concerned in the days leading up to her hospitalization that they had even contacted a priest about performing an exorcism. Desperate to make sense of what was happening, the woman had drawn a disturbing picture of what she saw. The faces had unnaturally large teeth, eyes, and ears, with a horizontally elongated shape reminiscent of a football. Medical staff were baffled by her vivid descriptions and the terror in her eyes as she recounted her experiences. This was clearly no ordinary case. After extensive testing and consultation, it was determined that the woman was suffering from a rare condition called Charles Bonnet syndrome. Patients with this perplexing disorder often report seeing small people and animals, bright moving shapes, or grotesquely distorted faces. These hallucinations are purely visual, with no accompanying sounds, adding to their unsettling nature. As the doctor explained the diagnosis, the woman breathed a sigh of relief, finally having an explanation for her terrifying visions. But a part of her still wondered. If her mind could conjure such vivid horrors, what other nightmares might be lurking in the depths of her subconscious, waiting to emerge? The football-faced demons may have been explained away, but the fear they instilled lingered on. Mother's Final Visit by Thomas Nakamura. In 1995, a man named Tomakata was plunged into the depths of despair after losing his beloved mother to cancer. Overwhelmed by grief, he locked himself away in his bedroom for days on end, completely devastated and unable to face the world. One night, as he lay in the darkness of his room, Toma was startled by an unexpected sound. The wooden floor outside his door began to creak as if someone was slowly approaching. His breath caught in his throat as he looked up and saw an impossible sight. His mother standing in the doorway, watching him with a serene expression. Toma's mind reeled, unable to process what his eyes were telling him. His screams of shock and terror were so loud that concerned neighbors called the police. When authorities arrived, they found Toma in a state of hysteria, babbling about his mother's ghostly visitation. Doctors examined him thoroughly, but could find no medical explanation for what would normally cause such vivid hallucinations. The experience left Toma deeply shaken, questioning everything he thought he knew about life and death. As far as anyone knows, Toma never saw his mother's apparition again, but the memory of that night haunted him, leaving him to wonder, had it truly been a final visit from beyond the grave? Or was his grief-stricken mind playing cruel tricks on him in his darkest hour? The line between reality and illusion had been irrevocably blurred. The Thing in My Closet, by Jennifer Walsh. This chilling encounter happened when I was just a little girl, living alone with my single mom. She always made a point to check on me every night when she got up to use the bathroom. But one particular night stands out in my memory. A night that still sends shivers down my spine years later. I remember waking up suddenly thinking I heard strange noises coming from my closet. As I peered into the darkness, I saw my mom standing at the foot of my bed giving me a playful wave. She told me to go back to sleep in a soothing voice. Then, to my confusion, she walked over to my closet and pulled the door until it was barely open. What happened next is seared into my mind. My mum just stood there in the closet, poking her head through the tiny crack of the barely open door. I can still vividly picture her eye peeking out at me, unblinking in the shadows. Being a naive child, I laughed at what I thought was a silly game and drifted back to sleep. The next morning, as I ate my cereal, I casually asked my mum why she had been hiding in my closet the night before. She stopped dead in her tracks, giving me a look of utter bewilderment and concern. With growing alarm, she told me she hadn't been in my room at all that night. At first, she feared someone had broken in, but soon realized it must have been some kind of hallucination or vivid dream. That experience marked the first of only 3 hallucinations I've had in my life, but none have been as viscerally terrifying as that night. To this day, I can't shake the memory of that eye staring at me from the darkness. Who, or what, was really in my closet that night? And why did it choose to appear as my mother? Some questions are perhaps better left unanswered. The Shadow on the Highway, by Robert Martinez. Back when I was a long-haul trucker, I often found myself doing late-night runs to meet tight deadlines. I usually relied on strong coffee to keep me alert through those grueling overnight shifts. But this particular night, I had run out of my caffeinated lifeline, and things weren't going well at all. Several times I caught myself drifting off, nearly sending the massive truck careening off the road. Just as I thought I was finally shaking off the drowsiness and regaining my focus, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A pitch-black figure suddenly materialized in the road directly in the path of my oncoming truck. Acting on pure instinct, I swerved hard to avoid a collision, my heart pounding in my chest. I brought the rig to a screeching halt, trying desperately to gather my scattered wits. Glancing in my left side mirror, I saw the dark figure, still standing motionless in the middle of the empty highway. Something came over me in that moment, a reckless need to confront whatever this was. I'm not usually one to seek out conflict, but some force compelled me to throw open the door and march towards the shadowy form, ready to give it a piece of my mind. But when I reached the spot where I had seen the figure, there was nothing there. The road stretched out empty and silent in both directions. I was utterly alone on this desolate stretch of highway. Shaken to my core, I climbed back into the truck and drove another 5 miles before pulling over to try and sleep off whatever had just happened. Looking back, I tell myself it was just my exhausted mind playing tricks on me. But a part of me still wonders, why would my brain conjure such a terrifying apparition? What if it wasn't a hallucination at all, but something far more sinister lurking in the night? To this day, I can't shake the memory of that inky black silhouette and the chill that ran through me when I saw it. Some things defy explanation, and perhaps it's better that way. The Knife-Wielding Giant, by Michael Davis. I was 13 years old. I never really had sleeping problems. I was actually a really heavy sleeper. It happened on a Saturday morning. I went to bed late the previous night. When I woke up, or kind of woke up, I couldn't move at all. The only thing I could control were my eyes, and when I moved them to focus on the corner of the room, I saw the most horrifying thing I had ever witnessed in my life. There was a man probably about 8 ft tall, with a cut-open mouth dripping blood, made to look like a smile, and in the man's hand was a large carving knife. My heart started racing uncontrollably. I could feel cold sweat breaking out all over my body, but I was powerless to even wipe it away. The metallic scent of blood filled my nostrils as the giant's gruesome grin inched closer. My biggest fear came true as the man started hovering towards me, not walking, not even moving a single limb, just hovering over to me like a ghost. I tried to scream or move or anything, but I was paralyzed to my bed. The floorboards creaked ominously with each impossible glide forward. The man reached the edge of my bed, inches away from my face, and for the first time he moved his arm up the arm with the knife, and he raised the knife up to the ceiling, and I knew what was going to happen next. I closed my eyes, the only thing I could physically do, and waited for it to happen. But as I lay there for probably 30 seconds unharmed, I opened my eyes back up. The man was gone, and then I realized I could move. I got out of bed and ran to explain what happened to my parents. They immediately seemed to understand and explained that I had just experienced sleep paralysis. I don't know why I hallucinated something so horrific, but the fear was genuine, and I can still remember the man's face today. That twisted, bloody smile haunts my dreams even now. In moments of panic, I'm reminded of a verse my grandmother used to recite, "Say, I seek refuge with the Lord of the dawn from the evil of what he has created." It brings me some comfort, but the memory of that giant's face lingers on. A Mother's Sixth Sense by Lisa Rodriguez. Being a single mother and having to work 2 jobs, I always have to hire a sitter to watch my 3-year-old son. I have a long drive from my second job, and on a few occasions I've almost fallen asleep behind the wheel from exhaustion. There was one night that I felt myself starting to doze off, so I tried pinching myself and shaking my head and doing anything to wake myself up. There were no lights at all on this highway, which made it even worse, and then I heard a giggling sound coming from behind me. My heart leapt into my throat. That familiar laugh. It couldn't be. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white, as I fought to stay focused on the road ahead. I looked in the mirror and saw my 3-year-old looking at me in the back seat. His cherubic face beamed with innocent joy, completely unaware of the impossibility of his presence. For a split second, relief washed over me at seeing his smile, then cold reality set in. I slammed on the brakes and looked at the back seats to find them empty. The sudden silence was deafening. My hands trembled as I tried to process what I'd just experienced. Was I losing my mind from exhaustion? 10 seconds later, I got a phone call from the sitter telling me that he had fallen down the stairs and broke his ankle. I was fully awake after that and sped home. To this day, I still believe because of this that mothers have some kind of sixth sense when it comes to their children. As I raced home that night, I found myself whispering a prayer I'd learned long ago. Our Lord, grant us from among our wives and offspring comfort to our eyes, and make us an example for the righteous. In that moment of fear and uncertainty, I clung to the hope that my connection to my son transcended physical distance. The Elephant-Faced Terror by David Chen. This is the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I live in the country, but not a desolate area. I had a decent amount of neighbors that were close enough. There was still woods in all directions, though. I was home alone as usual one late night when I heard a legit scream coming out in the woods. I went outside into my backyard with a flashlight just to take a look through the trees. This was late, and nobody was still up, and all the lights were out. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, muffling even the usual nighttime sounds. My breath came out in visible puffs in the chilly air. Shining the light through the trees, I froze when the light landed on a tall figure, probably twice as tall as me, and it had some kind of long trunk hanging from its face that went down to its waist, almost like an elephant. It was moving in some kind of creepy march in my direction. All that I could see from it was blackness. There was no color to it. My blood ran cold as I watched this impossible creature lumber towards me. The beam of my flashlight trembled wildly, reflecting my terror. I could hear twigs snapping under its massive feet as it drew ever closer. A foul stench, like rotting meat, wafted towards me on the night breeze. I walked backwards into my house and slid the door shut, still looking in the direction of the thing, but it was gone. It completely vanished from sight. I still sincerely hope what I saw and heard was just in my head. But on sleepless nights when the woods seem too quiet, I find myself peering out the window, half expecting to see that trunk-like appendage swaying in the darkness. In those moments of fear, I recall a verse that brings me some comfort. "And we have already created man, and know what his soul whispers to him, and we are closer to him than his jugular vein." It reminds me that even in the face of inexplicable terrors, I am not truly alone. The Girl Who Followed Me Home by Brandon Cooper. You can see some weird things when you're tired, but the thing about this story, I wasn't tired. Me and the family were on vacation to some resort in a very rural area of Pennsylvania. To make the setting creepier, there weren't many young people there for me and my brothers to hang out with. It seemed like more of an adult resort, but then one day, when I was walking outside of the main lodge of the resort, I for some reason looked up to a window on the second floor and saw a teenage girl looking down at me. From that distance, she looked kind of cute, so I gave her a wave, but she didn't show any sign of reaction, so I just moved on. However, later that same day, I was so bored that I was sitting on the swing set at the little playground of the resort, and that's when I saw the same girl again. She was a little ways away from me, down past the playground, close to the tree line, and she was just standing there, staring at me. Being a teenage guy, my hormones controlled my body, and so I got off the swing and began walking over to her. As I started getting closer to her, I realized she wasn't as cute as I thought she was. There was something about her face that just gave off a creepy vibe. I can't put my finger on it, but if I had to say, I think it would have to do with her eyes and her mouth. I'd say once I got about halfway over to her, she turned around completely and ran into the woods. And I mean, she full-on ran into the woods. I stopped in my tracks, completely turned off. This girl seemed like a freaky stalker. I didn't see her the rest of our stay at the resort. During the car ride home, miles and miles away from the resort, I was thinking about her, how maybe, if I followed her into the woods, I could have gotten laid even though there was something off about her face. But then, what I saw next made me feel like my heart dropped into my stomach. Looking down ahead, I saw the same girl standing by the tree line on the side of the highway. As we sped past her, I saw her head turned so that she was always looking right at me, even through the tinted minivan windows. I asked my parents if they saw her, and they just responded, "Saw who?" Soon afterwards, I accepted that it was all in my head and that the girl was never even there. But sometimes late at night, when I'm driving alone on dark roads, I catch glimpses of a familiar silhouette in my rearview mirror. In those moments, I find myself reciting, "Say, I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind, the King of mankind, the God of mankind, from the evil of the retreating whisperer." It helps calm my nerves, but I can never fully shake the feeling of being watched. The Choking Shadow by Amanda Foster. I can tell you from experience that sleep paralysis is the scariest thing you can go through. I was 19 at the time, and unlike most other people, I had experienced sleep paralysis 3 times in my life. But on one horrible night, it happened a 4th time, and it was much worse than any other time, or anything in my life for that matter. I opened up my eyes, just as the morning sun began to peek its light into my somehow opened blinds, but I found myself unable to move. It's already a hellish experience enough, but what I saw only made it an emotionally scarring experience. There was a little girl standing by the wall, staring me down. At least I assume she was, because her eyes were nothing but black. Anyone's neutral response would be to jerk up and scream or attack, but I couldn't do anything. The girl then started taking giant, exaggerated steps, stretching her legs more than humanly possible. She reached my bed and stopped, and finally she threw her hands around my throat and squeezed, and I couldn't breathe. She was choking me, and in reality I could not breathe. I thought I was going to die, and I couldn't do anything about it. I was completely helpless, and then just as I felt as if I were taking my final gasps, my hands jerked up and I hit myself in the face. The girl was gone, and I was fully awake. I felt like I had been underwater for a whole minute, gasping for air. I had been genuinely cut off from breathing in air, but that wasn't even the scariest part. What I find the most terrifying, and you can only understand if you've experienced something like this yourself, was watching that little girl with her hands around my throat, choking me almost to death, and just sitting there watching and feeling it, unable to do anything. In the days that followed, I found myself whispering a prayer before sleep. Say, I seek refuge in the Lord of Daybreak from the evil of that which he created. It didn't banish my fears entirely, but it gave me a small sense of protection against the terrors that lurked in the shadows of my mind.